Ad hominem fallacy, discrediting someone's argument by attacking their personal traits instead of addressing the substance of their argument. Hasty generalization, making a broad claim based on insufficient or unrepresentative evidence. Red herring fallacy, distracting from the relevant issue by introducing a misleading or unrelated topic. Two quoque fallacy, discrediting an argument by pointing out the opponent's hypocrisy rather than addressing the argument itself. Slippery slope fallacy, asserting that a relatively small first step will inevitably lead to a chain of related events resulting in a significant, usually negative effect. Special pleading fallacy, applying standards or rules to others while exempting oneself for certain circumstances without adequate justification. Loaded question, asking a question that contains an assumption that traps the respondent into confirming it. False dilemma fallacy, presenting two options as the only possibilities when more exist or, by presenting them as mutually exclusive when they are not. Strawman fallacy, misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack. Circular reasoning, an argument that assumes what it is trying to prove, simply repeating the conclusion instead of providing evidence. Appeal to authority fallacy, using the opinion of an influential figure as evidence that the position is correct. Appeal to nature fallacy, arguing that something is good because it is natural or bad because it is unnatural. Composition fallacy, assuming that what is true for some parts of the whole must also be true for the entire whole. Division fallacy, assuming that what is true for the whole must also be true for all or some of its parts. Affirming the consequent, incorrectly assuming that a specific cause is true because the expected effect has occurred. Anecdotal fallacy, using personal experience or an isolated example instead of sound reasoning or compelling evidence. Appeal to emotion fallacy, manipulating an emotional response instead of presenting a logical argument. Burden of proof fallacy, asserting that the burden of proof lies not with the person making the claim, but with someone else to disprove it. No true Scotsman fallacy, dismissing counterexamples to a generalization by claiming they are not true members of the group. Texas sharpshooter fallacy, cherry-picking data to fit a specific conclusion while ignoring data that contradicts it. Suppressed correlative, redefining one of two mutually exclusive options to make one alternative impossible. Personal incredulity fallacy, assuming something is false because one finds it difficult to understand or imagine. Ambiguity fallacy, using a phrase with multiple meanings and failing to clarify which one is intended, causing confusion. Genetic fallacy, judging something as good or bad based on its origin rather than its current meaning or context.
Middle ground fallacy, assuming that the truth is always a compromise between two opposing positions. Affirming a disjunct, incorrectly assuming that if one part of an either or statement is true, the other part must be false. Appeal to tradition, assuming something is better or correct simply because it is older or traditional. Sunk cost fallacy, continuing an endeavor because of past investments, time, money, effort rather than current costs outweighing benefits. Appeal to ignorance, asserting that a proposition is true because it has not yet been proven false or vice versa. Continuum fallacy, rejecting a claim because it is not precise enough or because the boundaries between categories are not clear. Equivocation, using an ambiguous term in more than one sense, thereby making the argument misleading. Faulty analogy, assuming that because two things are alike in one or more respects, they are necessarily alike in some other respect. Denying the antecedent, incorrectly assuming that the inverse of a true statement must also be true. False cause, presuming that a real or perceived relationship between things means that one is the cause of the other. Definist fallacy, defining a term in a way that makes one's position easier to defend. Ecological fallacy, assuming that what is true for a group as a whole must also be true for individuals within the group. Etymological fallacy, believing that the original or historical meaning of a word or phrase is necessarily similar to its actual present-day meaning. Quoting out of context, taking a quote out of its original context to distort its intended meaning. False equivalence, drawing an equivalence between two subjects based on flawed or false reasoning. Historian's fallacy, assuming that decision-makers in the past viewed events from the same perspective and had the same information as those subsequently analyzing the decision. Inflation of conflict, exaggerating the amount of disagreement in a field to invalidate claims in that field. Incomplete comparison, making a comparison that is misleading because it omits one or more important elements. Ludic fallacy, confusing games and reality by applying the rules of games to real-life situations, leading to incorrect conclusions. Moralistic fallacy, inferring what is based on what ought to be, violating the distinction between facts and values. Nirvana fallacy, comparing a realistic solution with an idealized one and dismissing the realistic solution because it does not achieve the ideal. Proof by assertion, repeating a proposition until it is accepted as true without providing evidence or addressing contradictions. Cherry picking, selecting only data that supports one's position while ignoring data that contradicts it. Psychologist's fallacy, assuming that one's subjective experience accurately reflects the true nature of an event. Reification fallacy, treating an abstract concept as if it were a concrete, real event. Retrospective determinism, believing that because something happened under certain circumstances, it was bound to happen due to those circumstances. Thought-terminating cliché, using a cliché to end an argument instead of addressing the point. Fallacy of the single cause, assuming that there is a single, simple cause of an outcome when it may have been caused by multiple factors. Appeal to the stone, dismissing an argument as absurd without providing a counter-argument. Ignacio Ylenkai missing the point. Presenting an argument that may be valid but does not address the issue in question. Circumstantial ad hominem, discrediting an argument by pointing out that the person making it stands to benefit from it. Tone policing, criticizing the emotion behind a message rather than addressing the message itself. Association fallacy, assuming that properties of one thing must also be properties of another thing if both belong to the same group. Appeal to accomplishment, deeming a proposition true or false based on the accomplishments of the person making the claim. Courtier's reply, dismissing criticism by claiming the critic lacks sufficient knowledge or credentials. Appeal to consequences, concluding that a hypothesis is true or false based on whether the premise leads to desirable or undesirable consequences. Appeal to novelty, claiming that something is superior or better solely because it is new or modern. Bulverism, assuming and asserting that an argument is flawed because of the arguer's identity. Chronological snobbery, believing that modern ideas are superior to those from earlier ages simply because they are modern. Entitled to my opinion fallacy, discrediting opposition by claiming entitlement to an opinion rather than logically analyzing the opposition. Two wrongs make a right, countering an allegation of wrongdoing with a similar allegation. Vacuous truth, making a claim that is technically true but meaningless. Fallacy, asserting that an argument is false simply because it contains a fallacy. These fallacies illustrate common errors in reasoning and argumentation, emphasizing the importance of logical consistency and sound evidence in forming valid arguments.